Hi, welcome to the video on the lead up to and some of the Latin texts, the beginning of the love affair between Dido and Aeneas. On the first page here, you'll see 4 images. They're kind of famous images, and you'll see that they kind of tell the story, the lead up a bit, and then in the next slide we'll look at some Latin text, and we'll talk about what it means. We'll translate it. We'll talk about some grammar stuff. It'll be a good time. So I've numbered these 4 pictures so that we know which order we're going to go in. So we're going to start with picture number 1 up here, where we see Aeneas in the chair there, and then Dido lounging out on the bed. And this is supposed to be, I guess, the books 2 and 3. So in book 1, of course, Aeneas arrives in Carthage, where Dido is the queen. And after kind of some mystical stuff, with a cloud, he's kind of hiding in a cloud. His mom enshrouds him. He gets to walk around Carthage a bit, and he finds his comrades that have also landed in Carthage. They got separated by a storm, but they all kind of reunite. And Dido offers hospitality in the end, even though at first she kind of arrests them. It's a little bit of a tricky situation. But anyway, she says oh, you're the Trojan from the Trojan War. Tell the story, how did you get here? And so for 2 books, books 2 and 3, he kind of tells the story of how he got to Carthage. Book 4 is kind of the resume of the narrative. And that is he's done telling the story, and now it's Dido and Aeneas. The beginning of book 4 is Dido madly in love with Aeneas. Now, I have to go back to book 1 for the reason for that, but Aeneas has a young son with him, and you actually can see him if I zoom in right there. And what happens in book 1 is Cupid disguises himself as Aeneas' son and ends up kind of sneaking up and getting Dido with an arrow of love, and she falls in love with Aeneas. And Dido is the queen of Carthage. She's in charge. She's she's completely in charge because her husband has died. So she's a widow, and she's the sole ruler of a city as a woman in North Africa. So that's kind of cool. But anyway, Cupid disguises himself as Ascanius, who is the son of Aeneas, and kind of attacks Dido with an arrow of love, and she falls in love with Aeneas. And so in book 4, she professes her love, and her sister is like, yeah, this is a good idea. And so she invites Aeneas to go on hunting. Now, it's a couple things that you have to know about this. Hunting back then was probably not much hunting. It was probably much like this image here. So if we're going down to image 2, this is them getting ready for a hunt. You'll notice their clothes are not much use for hunting, nor are they going to be any kind of secretive. They're going to have dogs run after animals, and they're going to kind of ride around on their horses and have a merry old time. Again, it looks like Dido is not prepared to be doing any kind of hunting in the garments that she's wearing, but what are you going to do? So it's kind of an aristocratic social gathering more than it is an actual hunt. But regardless, it's the queen of Carthage and a prince's cousin, I guess, of Troy. So he's still connected to the royal line of Troy, at least. So it's in a very aristocratic hunt, and there isn't much detail about the hunt, actually, in book 4, because before anything can happen, a storm hits, going to scene 3. This really intense storm hits, and you can see all the nice work with the trees being bent and stuff like that in the image. And everybody kind of runs looking for shelter because they're out in the middle of the woods or in the fields and whatnot, and they can't just go back to the city because there's this really intense storm, so they have to kind of seek shelter. And of course, Dido and Aeneas happen to go to the same cave for shelter, and I'm not going to tell you what happens, but they get married, and according to this, they touched each other's shoulders, and we're going to move on from there. So that's just to get you caught up, but this kind of whole thing becomes a very famous love affair, to where Henry Purcell, for instance, makes a whole a whole opera out of it. It's beautiful. So very famous stuff. And what we're going to read, starting with the passage on the next slide and throughout this quarter, are a few passages of Book 4 that kind of get you the sense for this love affair in the original Latin from the Aeneid. It kind of starts right away with the storm. So you have to imagine they're out hunting. They're all out in the woods. It's kind of the scene here. And there's Dido, there's Aeneas, and there's a bunch of, I guess, handmaids and stuff like that. They're all on horses. And then Virgil writes, "In terrae magno miscere murmure caelum incipit insequitur cum mixta grandine nimbus. In et Tyri comites passim et Trojana Juventus Dardaniusque nepos veneris diversa per agros tecta metu petiere. Ruante mondibus omnes." It's so good. Especially look at that first line, "In terrae magno miscere murmure caelum." All those M sounds create the kind of this poetic rumbling of the sky with the thunder that's happening. It's not exactly what it says, so it's not like the words do not mean like, oh, we're thundering and lightning, but it's still a cool effect in my opinion. Very neat thing. So interea, and then we have magno going with murmure. Miscere is an infinitive we can label. Caelum being neuter can be nominative or accusative, and then incipit is a verb. It just means begin. And since we have a passive infinitive here, we're probably going to have caelum be the nominative. So here we go. "Meanwhile, the sky begins to be mixed with a great murmur." Notice those ablatives, with a great murmur, with a great rumbling. Miscere, the infinitive, the passive infinitive, to be mixed. And we move on. "In sequitur cum mixta grandine nimbus." So if we label, we get our nice deponent verb. It's a compound of sequor, so you could have easily seen, oh, the tour ending is deponent. Commixta grandine, a beautiful ablative absolute there with the PPP. Commixta grandine being ablative, and then nimbus, the nominative, the subject of in sequitur. A cloud follows with hail having been mixed with it. So yeah, it's a bit tough out there now with the rumbling and the hail. "Et Tyri comites passim et Trojana Juventus." The Tyrian comrades. The Tyrians are, of course, the Carthaginians. So the Carthaginian comrades, passim et Trojana Juventus, and the Trojan youth. Notice youth is an interesting word because it has a US, but it's actually feminine. So the Trojana goes with Juventus there. Perhaps talking about his son. Dardaniusque nepos, and the Dardanian grand descendant of Venus. Probably just son here, because Aeneas is Venus's son. So it goes. But Dardanian is another word for Trojan, because they are said to be descended from a guy named Dardanus. And nepos is, of course, a nominative. Anyway, diversa per agros tecta. Diversa, you have to kind of bring this down to tecta. Per agros is a preposition. And then metu, the ablative petiere. This is one of those instances where you have a perfect stem, peti, and then the ere, because it looks like a present active infinitive, but it's on a perfect stem, that means it's not actually that infinitive. It's actually the erunt ending. So they all sought various shelters through the fields out of fear, or with fear, metu, with fear. So kind of everybody's scattering, yet the Tyrian comrades are all doing that. They're all seeking different shelters, and the Trojan youth and the Dardanian descendant of Venus, they all sought different shelters through the woods. Ruant de mondibus omnes. De montibus being a preposition is a bit easy. Omnes just means like sheets of water, rivers. Rivers flow down from the mountains. So this isn't like literally like, oh, there's rivers going down from the mountains. It's actually there's just so much water coming down. It just seems like rivers are falling off of the mountains nearby, like and onto the people and through the fields. So that's kind of the expression there. And this next part has some artistry to it. So we're gonna keep it going here. Speluncam dido dux et Trojanus eandem deveniunt. A couple things. One, speluncam and eandem agree. The an is actually the word the part you worry about here. It should be eamdem, but that's harder to say. So the n and the d kind of combine to make an eandem sound, which is why the nd works. But the eam is just aid, and dem is a suffix. Anyway, Dido dux et Trojanus. So what you get are nominative and nominative, Dido the leader, and the Trojan. So actually what you end up with is a line that makes a large chiasmus. Because you have nominative with Dido dux and Trojanus, and then the agreement between speluncam, which is accusative, and eandem, which is also accusative. So you have an A-B-B-A structure. Now, the cool part about this chiasmus, not all chiasmuses do this cool thing. This is actually also a word picture. Eandem speluncam means the same cave. And you can see that here, the cave is enclosing Dido and the Trojan. The words actually like surround them like the cave would, which I think is a nice play by Virgil there, a nice word picture. So I give Virgil credit. I give Virgil credit a lot, but that's just another way. And then deveniunt right there. Engemment is this cool device here where you have this verb that ends the sentence as the first word of the next line, then the sentence ends. So you get Dido and the Trojan leader. They came to the same cave, if you're translating literally through this. But notice how poetic that is. It doesn't sound very poetic in English, like when you say, oh, Dido, the leader, and the Trojan came to the same cave. Not very poetic, but like in the Latin, you can definitely see so much poetry happening here. The chiasmus, the word picture, the engemment there. So anyway, that's a really cool part. Primetellus et pronuba Juno dant signum. Yeah, so first we have, both the land, Mother Earth herself, Tellus, the land, Mother Earth, at pronuba Juno, and Juno as a bridesmaid. It's almost like somebody setting up a wedding or a bridesmaid, a pronuba. Because Juno's, of course, the goddess of marriage. Dant signum, give a signal. So this is planned, you can see here. Like kind of Mother Earth's in on this. You get Juno that's setting these guys up. Now, if you haven't read books like 1, 2, and 3, you're missing a whole bunch because Juno is really doesn't like Aeneas. She doesn't like the Trojans actually at all. You learn that in book 1 pretty quickly. I know that you're reading this before the AP curriculum when you'll get all of that information. But Juno is really hostile to the Trojans and Aeneas, and she doesn't want them to get to Troy. So she's almost like happy that they're in Carthage. She loves Carthage. They're happy. She's happy that they're in Carthage because they're not going to Italy if they're in Carthage. So the longer she can keep them there, the longer she can kind of delay their fate of going to Italy. And so she's like, oh, we'll marry Aeneas and Dido. That way, like it's like they'll stay there longer, and if they have to leave, then it'll be a big, like, huge problem. And Juno's just kind of throwing wrenches and things. So Juno, the bridesmaid, she gives a signal. Fulsere Ignace et conscius aeter Canoe Bees sumo culularunt vertique nymphae. And you thought you'd never see ululo in an actual Latin sentence. Fulsere, this is just like petiere above, so you kind of have the same phenomenon as happened here, where you have that perfect stem, fulsi, but you have that ere, so it's erunt, so it's actually fulserunt. And then you get Ignace et conscius aeter, both nominatives, fires and the conscious upper air flashed. Canoe Bees, 4 marriages. Ooh, uh-oh. because that's a dative of purpose right there, Canoe Bees. They flashed for marriage. And so sumo goes with vertique there, ulularunt your verb, and then oh, that by the way, that's ululaverunt, a nice little contraction of the verb there. Ululaverunt, ululaverunt, it's the same thing. Again, we have to kind of smush them for the meter. Sumo vertique is both ablative. So the nymphs are your subject here. The nymphs howled from the highest peak, or on the highest peak is fine too. And so you get this scene of like lightning flashing and the upper air is booming, I suppose, with the conscious iter. It doesn't say booming, by the way; it just says it flashes. But like with the lightning, I just kind of was assuming it. And then like the nymphs howled from the highest peak. So you get kind of this affirmation of their marriage, with the landscape and the nymphs around are just kind of going nuts. But this is an interesting one because there was no marriage ceremony. It was all kind of like a heavenly thing. It wasn't much of a mortal thing. So it's interesting to see where the characters take that. Ille dies primus leti primusque malorum causa fuit. So here we have ille dies. Primus leti being genitive. We have too many nominatives to consider nominative plural. Primus que, it's another nominative. So we have a que that connects more nominatives here. And actually, this is a very interesting phenomenon. Primus ends up going with causa. Causa doesn't often have this like masculine thing going on. Actually, you know what you could do is just gap dies. I'm just gonna take that interpretation and run with it. Since we already said dies was masculine with ille, let's avoid the confusion about causa, even though causa is a weird word like that. So yeah, Fui kind of gets gapped up. So that day was the first of death, or that was the first day of death. That's a good one. That was the first day of death. And that and that first day was the cause of evils or something like that, and was the cause of evils. I always translate it as was the first cause of evils, which would make Primus go with causa, and it can. There's a justification for that. It's just awkward. If you want to gap dies, it makes it a lot more. It makes it a lot more friendly to understand there. So one more time, I'll translate it all the way through here. So that was the first day of death and the first cause of bad things. So the marriage ends up being like, here's some foreshadowing. It's like that marriage, this is the first day that like is going to lead to somebody dying. If you know the story of Dido and Aeneas, you already know who's going to die. And the first cause of bad things. So there's not going to be much good that comes out of this. There's going to be a lot of evil. In fact, if you imagine Aeneas being a descendant of Romans, or an ancestor of Romans, not a descendant, but an ancestor, you can imagine this whole like Carthage-Rome thing happening, right? If you kind of consider Aeneas to be a bit of a Roman, because he's like his descendants will eventually found Rome. So a very interesting thing, and that's why I think Virgil is kind of hinting that like this is the beginning that's going to cause tension between Carthage and the people who then go up to Italy, and in few generations found Rome. All right, ne quenim specie famave moetur, nec iam furtivum dido meditatur amorem, conjugium vocat, hoc praetexit nomine culpam. Oof, okay. All right, so indeed, ablative, movetur is a verb. Now we don't have a subject yet, so we have to kind of keep going. Nec, yam's an adverb. Furtivum is an accusative. Dido is then your subject. Okay, so we can kind of gap her up. Meditatur is another verb, but nec is there, so we have a conjunction, we're fine. Furtivum goes with the morem, and I can translate from there. And she indeed is not moved by appearance or fame. Nor does Dido contemplate now a secret love, furtivum amorem. She does contemplate a love, but it is no longer a furtivum amorem. Conjugiam vocat. She calls it marriage. Don't get confused on that translation, by the way. I've seen many students just write, she calls a marriage. No, she calls it marriage, like what just happened. She calls it the marriage. And she has justification, too. That's kind of the whole point of lines 165, 66, 67, 68. Like, those lines are supposed to be like, oh, yeah, Dido has a reason to call it marriage, right? Because Juno was like summoning fires from on high. The nymphs were howling from the peaks. It was supposed to be kind of like a marriage scene, and Dido interpreted it as such. He's like, "Well, we're married." Anyway, the next part is going to be a Virgil's judgment, because Hoc agrees with Nomine. I'll erase this blue line. I think it's getting confusing in there. Here we go. All right, so Hoc agrees with Nomine, and then praetexit, culpam, verb, direct object. The subject is still Dido. She covered up the sin with this name. In other words, what they did in the cave, I'm going to go ahead and just like let you imagine, but it wasn't great. But she's justifying it in her head with this whole conjugium vocat. She calls it a marriage. She covered up the sin, ablative, with this name. Oof. So, that's where we end this first part. I pointed out, I think, most of the cool parts for you, all of the really poetic and the really nice parts, and we went over the translation. Make sure to rewind if you don't understand. Email me with questions, but this part isn't too bad. It should be pretty straightforward. Also, remember scansion's a thing. If you're kind of studying along and you're like, oh man, this only took me like an hour, and this is like a week's worth of material. Scan the lines. You might get asked on an assessment on scansion. So anyway, do email me. I'm looking forward to continuing reading this with you. It's one of the most famous parts of the Aeneid, the Dido-Aeneas love story. So hopefully we can continue and keep going.